Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother dog, know me, understand.
Welcome to the Sargassum Podcast. I'm Robbie Thigpen.
I'm Francisca Elmer.
And I am Mar Fernandez. And we are your hosts for today. And we are going to share with you the latest ideas and concepts about sargassum and sargassum beaching events which have become an international challenge.
Hello everyone. How is everybody doing? Mar, how is your week going?
Hi Fran, nice to see you after such a long time without interviews. Fine, I've been pretty busy with work and renovations in the new house, but otherwise everything is fine. How are you doing? How is sargassum in Mexico right now?
It's pretty terrible. I haven't been in the water for, I don't even know how many weeks, maybe 3. We have a lot of brown water, we have a lot of decomposing sargassum on the beach, and the local authorities do their best to clean it up, but it's just a lot. And apparently it's going to be the biggest year ever.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, we definitely need more companies and more people working on these issues. And that's also one of the aims of this podcast, to try and make a network of all these people interested in finding the solutions to this problem. It's really interesting that this time we got connected to you guys through Rich, which is one of our patrons, and he's himself a farmer in the UK, so he's familiar with making bales of hay and so on. Hi, Rich. And he would love to listen to this interview. And he was actually the one thinking, okay, maybe one of the solutions to sargassum is actually collecting it and baling it, and that's how he came up with you guys. And that if you become a Patreon, you can also recommend us some people that we can interview, and you can also ask questions. So actually today during the interview, we will also ask some questions that Rich has for you guys. But yeah, let's move on with the introductions. Fran, go ahead.
Today we got 2 interviewees, Brandon Hill and Tom Linton. Brandon Hill is a coastal and environmental planner at a large engineering and consulting firm, and has previously worked as director of the shoreline department of the City of South Padre Island, and as Sargassum Early Advisory System project manager at Texas A&M University. Tom Linton is an emeritus professor at Texas A&M and has studied the impacts of sargassum on the Gulf Coast beaches for decades. He was also involved in the development of the predictive models for forecasting sargassum landings, and together they have developed the bale-style collection method to bale sargassum and to use it as a natural dune-building support. Welcome, Brandon, and welcome, Tom.
Thank you so much.
Really nice to have you here. And as you might know, the first question that we always ask our guests is, what is sargassum to you? So tell us.
Sargassum, Brandon. So to me, as we discussed off camera a little while ago, to me originally sargassum was alien. I had no idea what it was or what role it had in the ecosystem. But today, sargassum is it's a crucial variable in a number of ecosystems. It's a cyclical force that acts as shelter, stability, nutrients, and even a food source for oceanic and coastal creatures alike.
And to me, sargassum was an indication of changes in the marine system. My involvement was just as a bystander. Captain Robert Webster and Brandon Hill with the brains and the brawn that made the predictive system we had work. All I had to do was get money and stay out of the way and not interfere with what they were doing. And so when Robert was a wild thinker. You never knew what he was going to come up with. Some of these things were just insane. but I'd still go out and get money, and he'd try them, and some of them worked, and one of them really worked, that predictive system. But the thing is, he first thought, he said, wonder what this stuff comes and goes. So he went back. We have a newspaper in Galveston, the Galveston Daily News, that has been published since 1842. And so all those records are there in various forms. And so he went back and went through all the papers, particularly in the summer months, from 1842 to present day, to see if there was a cycle to sargassum. Is the thought being that if this stuff is knee-deep out on the beach, the tourists that come down are going to write letters to the editor complaining. And so in that, he found about an 8-year cycle up until 2018. And after 2018, it didn't work. Right now, the beaches of Galveston are clean as can be. They've been clean since 2018. All of this is a very strange phenomenon. The thing that we did, we had a two-pronged approach to this. One of them was the real science and what was going on scientifically behind all this. And the homeowners associations and the Rotary Club and all those guys, they didn't give a hang about the science. They just wanted people coming to the beach, spending money, renting motel rooms. So we talked about how we were going to help the tourism industry by knowing all this stuff, but all the while we were looking underneath at what the science was behind all of this. And so we had to come up with a way to provide something for those people who wanted the tourist business. And so they set up, Robert and Brandon set up this predictive system where they could, about 2 weeks out, tell before the sargassum hit the beaches. And they let all the beach managers along the Galveston coast and other places started picking it up. And so if they had 2-week notice, they could get ready for it. Most of these beach communities do not have the equipment or the manpower to do the cleaning of the beach. So you go to the city council and you request an extra $10,000 to hire people and rent machinery. And the sargassum doesn't show up. And then you go back, after you've paid all these people, you go back to the city council and say, oops, well, we made a mistake. They don't take kindly to that. They have a process called firing the person that has done that. So we had a money-making thing, which they loved us for that. But what we were interested in was the science of it. I mean, we were sub-rosa scientists studying why this stuff was doing what it did and where it came from. There was all kind of theories in the beginning of where it came from. Our proposition was it came through the Mona Channel. It started in the Caribbean and came in through the Mona Channel. Well, the big-time scientists said that, a lot of them said that was nonsense. And one day, I lived on a house right on the beach in Galveston. And I was out walking my dog just before dark. And I walked up the beach, started back, the weather came up, lightning, thunder, dog was raising Cain, wanting to go home. I walked back, and something looked like a coconut. You know, these coconuts that wash around and get barnacles on them, plopped up out of the beach. The waves were knocking things in. So I thought, I wonder what that is. I walked on and I came back. I kicked it. And I said, that's not a coconut. That is a camera. And so I picked it up and I took it home. The dog dragged me home. And when I got home, I cleaned it up. And sure enough, it was a camera. One of those underwater cameras where people dive and take pictures, you know. And so I kept fiddling with it. And I thought, aha, there's a latch on. This is in a case. So I opened the case up and I took it out. And there was a camera in pristine condition. And I thought, well, maybe that little chip in there has something on it where I can tell where this came from. So I got it out. I charged it up and it worked. The camera was still working. So I'd written some articles for the paper about the police academy. And I knew some people down at the police station. So I went down to this guy that I knew there who did IDs and, you know, had some kind of a slim thread that he would find somebody that murdered somebody. So I went to him, I said, Bobby, I got this camera, I got some pictures on here, and there's a truck in there way in the background. If you can bring that thing out and look at the license plate, tell me where this thing came from. And he said, okay, I'll look at it. And so he called me back. He said, I can't get anything off of that. So that's too far away. And I said, well, if you can find anything. So a couple of days later, he called me. He said, I got it. And I said, what? He said, I know where that thing came from. And I said, come down here. He said, come down here and I'll show you. So he got down there. There were all kind of pictures of underwater. And then there were several of some kind of convention, some kind of meeting. People sitting in chairs and somebody up at a podium talking. And then another one was a woman standing there, and she had a piece of paper down at her, was holding it down at her side. He said, I blew this up. And said, that's a certificate of appreciation from Cayman Brock in the Cayman Islands. And he said, I called that woman that runs this, I called the place that runs it, I got this woman that runs it. And she said, yeah. Said, a friend of mine told me of somebody who's a professional diver who lost a camera about 9 months ago. And I said, oh, really? And he said, you know how to get in touch with her? And he said, oh, yeah, I found it. So he got on the phone, and he called her, and he said, I can't remember her name right now. He said, Ms. Jones, this is Sergeant such and such from the Galveston Police Department. She said, oh, yes? And he said, did you lose the camera about 9 months ago underwater? And she said, yes. And he said, we have it. And there was this long, great silence. And she said, oh, really? And he said, yeah. You want us to send it to you? And she said, oh, yeah. And so Robert Webster took that camera and went down there and handed it to her. They had a big deal, you know. The tourist people came out and they gave her a new camera, the people that manufactured it. But she put that camera, she was crawling back into the boat after she'd done an underwater shot. And the camera fell off. And so it was like a seabed drifter. You know what I'm talking about? A seabed drifter that the oceanographers used to trace currents. And so that camera spent 9 months in the water coming through with a Mona channel to pop up on the beach in front of Tom Linton and his dog 9 months later. And so we had pretty conclusive evidence that the nonsense that we had been spewing was actually accurate, that the sargassum came through the Mona Channel and it took it 9 months to get on the Galveston beaches. So that was, you know, all that hooey about bringing in the tourists or whatever was worth it to have found that piece of firm scientific data.
That's a really, really cool story. So you already told us a little bit about the sargassum situation in Texas. So Texas has gotten sargassum for a very long time. So can you tell us a bit about the history of sargassum and how it's impacting Texas generally?
As Tom mentioned, Captain Robert Webster did a lot of digging into old historic records to try and identify the cycles that sargassum may be arriving in, at least with respect to Texas. And one of the ways that he did that was he looked at the Galveston Daily News, which was this long-running newspaper. And what he found was not only that it was very much a cyclical occurrence, but that the same discussions that we were having then, they had been having for years. Some of the cooler stories that involve sargassum, in 1864, there's actually a record of Confederate soldiers that were marching down the beach to try and scout out some Union encampments. And as they were doing that, they wound up being outflanked, and the Union had routed around them, and they were going to be caught if they didn't do something immediately. And the record says that they released all their horses, and everybody buried themselves in the piles of sargassum that were lying on the beach. And they were able to avoid detection thanks to literally burying themselves in the sargassum. Other articles, like there's one from 1935, following the Great Depression in America. There was this effort from the government called the New Deal. And the whole idea was they were going to come up with ideas that were going to be useful construction projects and infrastructure, and they were things to put people back to work and to improve the country. And one of these New Deal projects was they hired a number of laborers and had everybody loading up sargassum with pitchforks and wheelbarrows and dumping it onto barges. And then they would take those barges and they would take them offshore and push the sargassum off of it. And then, as everyone on the call can imagine, it would wash back up on shore. And so then they would go back out with the wheelbarrows and the pitchforks and pick it back up and do it again. And they did this several times, enough times that it got featured in a newspaper article calling out the stupidity of the effort.
No wonder.
And so, yeah, as someone who was studying sargassum and its impacts on communities and ways to respond to it, seeing that, this has been going on for so many years, and it's been a struggle, and we've successfully dealt with it in the past, but we've also very unsuccessfully dealt with it. Another one of my favorites is there was a record in the Galveston Daily News of a neighborhood that attempted to get the city to pay to repaint all of their houses because they said that the amount of sargassum that the city had allowed to pile up was releasing noxious gas and was actually peeling the paint off their houses. And so this entire neighborhood said, yeah, we all need new paint on our houses because of the seaweed, which I just love. I think that's a delightful response from human beings to be inconvenienced by. Yeah, exactly. So to say that sargassum has been a part of Texas history is absolutely accurate. As far back as you can go, you can find references to it being used as fertilizer, references of people having to deal with it, complaining about it, trying to figure out why it's there. It is absolutely something that is just as natural as the waves arriving on the beach. It's just a little bit more infrequent. And it never really goes away. There are just simply periods of heavy arrival and light. And Tom's touched on this, but I think that it would help if I just quickly gave you a rundown of what the Sargassum Early Advisory System was, if that's okay with you, Mar and Fran.
Go for it.
Okay, so
Yes.
Tom was the figurehead for a laboratory at Texas A&M University at Galveston. But the muscle and the real brain was a man named Captain Robert Webster. And that man is not only responsible for so much of the understanding about sargassum here in Texas, but also he bettered so many people's lives throughout the Caribbean and Central America, North America. I mean, the man is a giant. And what he did, and Tom touched on this earlier, what Captain Robert Webster did was he looked at sargassum and said, I know it's being studied by folks. I know that people are trying to figure out how it works, but I really think that there's a system here. Nothing in nature just happens. There's got to be drivers in this system that are forcing the sargassum to do what it does. I want to try and understand that better. And that was the goal of the Sargassum Early Advisory System, was that this lab was set out with the intention of understanding sargassum better and eventually trying to figure out a way to utilize that understanding in helping coastal managers. And what we wound up with was very much I like to describe as a MacGyver approach to science, where we did not go and buy the fanciest computer banks to try and model how seaweed might have worked. We took basic scientific principles and tried to apply them the best that we could with the tools that we had access to. So we actually utilized satellite data that was being collected for land-based applications. It's actually the LandSAT system that we utilized. We knew that they were collecting photos off the coast anyway, and in certain parts of the ocean. And so we started to access those photos to see if we could correlate what we saw in the satellite image with what people were seeing in situ on the ground. And we started to see that, yes, there were certain clues, there were certain signals that you could pick up on, that the water looked a certain way, and we started to attribute that to sargassum mats. We realized that in the satellites, what we were seeing were the water breaking differently, caused by these large sargassum mats. And we put that together with a very basic understanding of certain oceanic principles in terms of localized currents, how gyres worked, the idea that there were large-scale pressure systems, just like, a lot of people hear of La Nina, similar systems that were literally turning off and on the different levers of this loop system, as Robert ended up coining it. And the more that we understood the variables that went into the loop system, the better we were able to forecast for people the sargassum's arrival. And then we, in addition to using, just some oceanographic methods and some satellites, we started to study the growth rate of sargassum when it had access to exceeding amounts of nutrients. And we learned that, it does have a voracious growth rate, which would explain why you could have a small amount of sargassum moving through the system, but once it reaches the neritic waters, the nutrient-rich waters, it could explode in terms of biomass. And all of these pieces, they were all pieces of a puzzle that we started to put together, all with the goal of being able to help the people who were on the ground, the folks who were depending on the tourism, the folks who were trying to manage a municipality. And we started that just with Texas in mind. But the more that people started using it, we ended up getting calls from folks in Panama, in the Caribbean, in Europe. We started to talk to people about this issue, and they saw the value in the system. And so I was at Texas A&M University at Galveston from 2012 until 2016, and we were going hard on the sargassum work all throughout that time, because it was prevalent. It was an issue that needed to be addressed, and we were trying to find that understanding that would allow for us to help folks. And that's really ultimately what led me into working as a coastal resource manager. Was we had been trying to be basic problem solvers for these communities, and it just made a lot of sense when I graduated that I would continue to try and do that for any communities that needed it.
That's wonderful.
But and we talk about Robert Webster, and we're going to talk a little bit later about the baling. Robert passed away 2 days after the baling project was completed.
Oh, that's sad.
And and he got to see a lot of his hard work come to fruition. But he also believed in planting trees whose fruit that you would not get to enjoy. And I think he would be very pleased to know that the work that he influenced is continuing to help people problem solve to this day, because that's really the sort of spirit that the man had. Was he was a problem solver for people. He wanted to understand our world better. He wanted to be a good steward of the resources that we had. And I think he would be very happy to see that there are people like yourselves who are continuing to try and be problem solvers and to unite organizations to make the world better.
Yeah, it's actually wonderful, and I'm sure he was contagious, right? And he had this optimism, and he shared it with all of you, and you all shared this drive to help people and to try and find the solutions. And one can hear that when talking to you guys. And so the next question is going towards the baling, right? And so how did you guys come up with the idea of baling the sargassum for dune restoration, and why is dune restoration important?
Like I said, Robert and Brandon were the brains in the brawn. Robert would come up with these crazy ideas. We started out trying to find out how sargassum caused the beach to build up. We made core samples and did all kind of stuff. And he came in one day and he said, I want to buy this tractor. And I want to have a tractor that sits up very high, like they have out in West Texas, where they do the. And I'm going to go along in the water out to about 6 feet, drive this tractor along in the water, and scrape the bottom. And I said, what on earth for? And he said, well, I think that we can tell if there's a sample down there. I said, the core samples didn't do that. And I said, how much is this thing going to cost? He said, oh, I'll figure $50,000 we can get one. And I said, you want me to go to those NASA people and tell them that we're going to buy a rigged up tractor that will go along in the water? How long do you think that thing will last in the salt water? He said, well, I never thought of that. And I said, I think we better rethink this. I said, you go away and come back with a little better idea, because I don't want to try to sell a $50,000 rust bucket to the NASA people. So he came back and he said, you're right. I'd like to see you go do that, because you'd really make a fool of yourself. And I'd laugh all the while. He was an irreverent kind of guy. He said, but I got another idea. He said, you know, the problem is handling this stuff. You get out there with a pitchfork or with a rake or whatever, and you got to, said, but if we could get that stuff in a manageable size where we could handle it, then that would be great. And I said, yeah, you can move it, transport it around. He said, yeah. He said, if we could get a hay baler to do that. He said, I've talked to a bunch of people, but there's not a hay baler that will work in salt water. He said, but I have got an idea, and I've talked to some people. Back, he used to be a park manager up in inland Texas somewhere. He said they got a little compactor. It's kind of like a garbage compactor that they use in nurseries to get rid of the leaves and stuff. And he said, I can get one of those. And I said, how much you want me to talk to NASA into? He said, oh, well, I think they're $20,000. I said, and we just bale this thing up, then we can move it around. They weigh about 75 pounds, and you can handle them by hand. I said, that sounds like a grand idea. So we went, I think we went over to Louisiana, somewhere we went and we talked with people. We got the money. He bought the thing. He had a trailer built so he could haul it around on it. And so he started making those bales. But one of the main ideas was to make it so that they could be handled, so that they could be stacked like sacks of feed or whatever on a trailer and hauled if you wanted to make mulch out of them for people. And we had a guy up in Huntsville, Texas, who wanted to get some to use as mulch in his gardens and whatever. So that was the main idea of doing that. And we got them. Then we had a Jen Figlis who published, he's an engineer, a coastal engineer, and he published the result. He was the one that was a driver, he and his graduate students, in building those dunes. So he came up, Robert said, if we can get these things covered with sand, they are really rich in nutrients, because that soft part outside is just filled with nutrients. So if we put these things down, cover them with sand, put beach grass on top of them, that ought to build a dune that would withstand some pretty severe weather. So that was the origin of, we went from a crab tractor out in 8 feet of water to this baler, which would make it easy to handle. And so that's where he got the idea was to make them compacted into a size that would be manageable to be handled, and then added on to that. It's another, like Brandon said, all this was a MacGyver kind of thing, baling wire and duct tape and grabbing pieces here and there of people that didn't even know about guys over here. And Robert and them would find these guys and put this stuff together. So from that, we came up with the idea of making the dunes. We did if you've seen that article, Jen and Anna Armitage and his graduate student, they did an article in the coastal. It's a publication from. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Coastal Sand Dunes and Dune Vegetation, Restoration, Erosion, and Storm Protection by Jen Figlis and Anna Armitage and Jacob Segrin. And it's in the Shore and Beach, Volume 82. But they put together these 4 dunes of different things with sand and with sargassum and without and whatever. And the one that had sargassum at the base, dune grass planted on top of that, so the roots would go down seeking the nutrients. That one withstood a pretty heavy blow, almost a tropical storm kind of thing that hit the beach. So it proved to be good. And then we had them in bales so that they could be transported to other things. One of the crazy things in Texas, the Texas people that manage the beaches, the Texas General Land Office, they have a regulation. You can't haul sargassum off the beach. You can't remove it. So they would gather it up and stack it against the seawall. It would rot in fumes when the wind blew over to the hotels, which is really something that attracts tourists, to be able to take your child out onto the seawall and have him break down and cry tears.
I should do that with my kid.
Yeah, government at its finest. So this was another thing we were working at, trying to get that regulation changed. So, and we got during 2018, when it was, literally hip deep on the beach, they gave a provision where it could be taken away. But that needed to be done when we had these heavy influxes of sargassum. But we had a way, in one very beneficial use, rebuilding the dunes, because the dunes washed away, and dunes are protecting in storm and hurricane times, and they had all kind of wonderful things that they did when you built these dunes. So you had that. Then we had another way to make use of it. There was a company down in Mexico for years that was collecting it and making a nutrient out of it, like a growth stimulator for plants. Are you familiar with those people? And so there were many uses. But first of all, getting into
we did interview some companies that used it for fertilizer, but not specifically extracting nutrients for plant growth, as far as I know.
Yeah, well, I talked to those guys a lot. They call, because they were without sargassum for a while, but it was a liquid, and maybe somewhere in back in the record, I got files of all that. Maybe I could find that contact for you. But they were in Mexico. I can't remember. I think their headquarters was in Mexico City. But
the idea of the baling of the sargassum was a necessity, because in Texas, we are unable to remove the sargassum from the beach. It's considered in the U.S. waters. It's considered protected fish habitat, and then after it reached the sand, it was part of the beach ecosystem, and the General Land Office, which oversees the beaches in Texas, didn't want it to be removed. They saw it as a valuable resource, and so the problem was, as everywhere in the world, it would never pile up where you needed it. It's not like the sargassum would aim for the sections of the beach that were wide and dune-free and plenty of room to go stack it. It would pile up right up against, for instance, the seawall in Galveston, or a very narrow section of beach. You would end up with so much sargassum, and the viewers, I'm sure, are familiar with this, that you couldn't walk from the beach itself into the water. You'd look a little bit like Jesus, because you're walking on top of the sargassum. And that was just a consistent problem. And the again, going back to that problem solving idea, if you had the ability to bale it, to relocate it, to literally use it as a vegetative building block to engineer a better beach system by relocating this material, all of a sudden that opened up a ton of possibilities. And dunes are really, they're the backbone of a coastal system. They're what provides stabilization. They protect the infrastructure behind it, and they're very crucial in terms of the providing ecological diversity for the resiliency of the coast. And so anything that we could do to try and enhance that system while addressing the problem of having the sargassum where you didn't need it anyway, that's really what birthed this idea of baling it and trying to use it for different applications.
The way we got into this, the dean in our school, Bill Sykes, came to me, called me to his office, and he said, "You and Webster are working on doing these cores out on the beach to see about sargassum building up the beach or not." He said, the Homeowners Association out at Pirates Beach is having a meeting to discuss whether they want to have the sargassum removed or not removed from the beach. Would you guys go out and talk to them and see what they have in mind? Well, yeah, I guess so. So I went to tell Robert, I said, Sykes wants us to go to a meeting tonight and talk about what we're doing out there. So we went out there, and there were about 150 people crammed into this room. So we went in, and the chairman of the outfit said, "Well, we have these two experts from A&M here to talk about this stuff." And they said, "What is your feeling about this?" And I said, "Well, we're here mainly to listen and see what y'all need." Keeping my mouth shut till I didn't want to put my foot too deep into it. So guy on one side of the room got up and he said, "It is an insane idea to be removing this material from the beach because it causes the beach to build up." And a guy on the other side of the room got up and said, "We got no tourists down here. We come down here and the beach is covered with this stuff. It's rotten, all kind of debris in it. Our kids cut their feet when they walk through it. It's got to be taken off or you're going to kill the tourist industry." And so the rest of the meeting, Robert and I sat there like deaf mutes. We said nothing. We said, "Thank you. We'll take this all back and consider it." So we got back, and I called the secretary at the dean's office, and I said, "I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Sykes to brief him on what we did out at the meeting last night." So I went in, and I said, "Dr. Sykes, I want to thank you for nearly getting us scalped." I said, "Those people are divided right down the middle. Half of them hate us, half of them think it's wonderful." I said, "This is an impossible situation." He said, "Well, it'll give you a research program, won't it?" And it did.
That's really, really cool. So you told us quite a bit about the baling already, but my question is, do you use fresh or dried sargassum for it? And does it actually decompose when baled, or does it stay the same?
What was used during the baling experiment that was conducted and recorded in Jens Figlis's work was sargassum that had landed fairly recently, there's actually photos in that document that show that it's landed for a little bit, because you can see that the yellow color is starting to fade and there's some red seeping in. But the idea was always that this was a method that could be used to respond to the sargassum landing and then be able to utilize it in some way. And so the concept was always that it could be utilized for fresh sargassum. Dry sargassum could be used as well in terms of still providing some sort of sand catch and structure, but a lot of those nutrients would have already seeped out by that time. So in terms of providing the perfect package of nutrient boost and stabilizing structure, fresh sargassum is always going to be better. And in terms of the way that it decomposes, I spent years studying seaweed and the way that it interacts with sand. Not many other people have, but a lot of people have played on the beach. And anytime that you or your kids are digging a hole on the beach, I guarantee you've hit a section where the sand is dark and it kind of stinks. And that's an anoxic section where the water hasn't allowed oxygen to seep down into it. And oftentimes it's also a nutrient-rich area where there's a lot of organic material. That is how sargassum looks as it breaks down, even in baled form. As that structure settles, sand works its way down into the bale. Eventually, the plant roots that are tapping into the sargassum sap out some of that nutrients. It naturally will break down and secrete the liquid, and what you end up having within a year to 2 years, even in natural sargassum landings that are allowed to accrete dunes and then are dug up later, you'll find evidence of organic layers, but no real sargassum structure anymore. And even that will completely dissipate over time, as evidenced by Robert's initial efforts to try and find sargassum records in the sand cores. He went and drove cores down and checked the sand and was hoping to find some sort of geologic record of sargassum landing based on the evidence of nutrient-rich organic layers. And the fact of the matter is that the coast is a very harsh environment. It is going to break down anything that you give it, and it's going to use it up. And that's just it stands to reason, and it's been shown that whether you're baling the sargassum, allowing it to accrete naturally, or just piling it up with a tractor, you're going to have that same process where it will get integrated into the system, it will boost vegetative growth, and then it will disappear.
Yeah, actually, a way to locate that old sargassum would be to look at its isotope signature. And I think there are some people now trying to do that, like taking sediment samples and then trying to look at the isotopic signal to see if they see layers of rotten sargassum down there. Yeah. Our patron Rich actually had a question that is regarding if you think there are like heavy metals accumulating on the sand because they're in the sargassum, and then they also could accumulate in the dunes, or do you think the waves and the rain eventually would just bring all that back to the ocean?
So I would reference back to the sentiment that I was just expressing, which is that the concept of using a baling process to address the sargassum, that's a change in the physical processing of the sargassum, but not the chemical. So naturally, sargassum is pushed up to the toe of the dune by the waves. A large portion of it will be washed back out to sea and broken down. What isn't will form a sand catch and will create coppice mounds, which will then become dunes, and it'll break down. So the concept of baling it changes the method that the seaweed gets the method by which the seaweed gets to the dune, but ultimately it doesn't change the process, which is one large benefit for it in terms of making sure that we're working with nature, not against her. So in my experience, I wouldn't anticipate any sort of negative impact to the environment by interacting with the sargassum in this method, no more than what you see in communities that are picking it up with pitchforks and wheelbarrows, or going out there with tractors, or utilizing rakes such as the beach tech. It's just a different method for the sargassum to reach the dunes. Ultimately, it's the same end location.
But you haven't measured arsenic content, for example, in the bales below the dune or close by.
But let me say something. That on the beach, it's a natural system. But when you put it in a landfill, it is not a natural system. So that's the place you need to be looking for arsenic and God knows what else. Because when you do that, you're messing with Mother Nature.
Bring it to a landfill, that sargassum could trickle down to the groundwaters or whatever and contaminate the groundwaters.
Exactly.
Fully agree.
Yeah.
Why do we have sargassum hip deep in 2018 and the beach is clean as can be since that time? Nothing like that. That's the question. It's wonderful for the tourists. They want to, but why is that happening? What is that system? Why has that change occurred? Clean as a whistle. You can't. The next year we had a company, a microbrewery in Galveston that opened up, made beer out of sargassum. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it was good. I'll tell you, it was good stuff. And this next year, we were going to, all along the coast, they have these things, the Mosquito Festival, the Alligator Fest. We were going to have the Sargassum Beer Fest, like in Germany, with the big.
It was a pretty good beer as well. It was a Gose style.
But turn it into.
So they actually called it Sargose.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they have to sell the beer recipe to Mexico and the Caribbean, because there's plenty of sargassum here to make beer.
We had a lot of fun, you see.
Yes,
we had a lot of fun.
Do.
We were a crazy bunch, but we had a lot of fun, and we did a lot of good.
For sure. Like, I also don't know why Texas isn't getting any sargassum right now, but I think the whole world is going crazy with the weather. Like, you had the really cold spell. Now Canada has really hot weather. So everything is different from normal. So maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah.
To get back to the bales, and we already talked about, using the bales where they naturally would occur in the dunes. But would that also be something to use for like mangrove restoration? Maybe the sargassum would naturally get to the mangroves anyways, and the bales could be used to make some soil for the mangroves.
As I mentioned,
what do you guys
historic
think?
Precedent for sargassum being rinsed and utilized in coastal flower beds and gardens. Galveston in the 1930s actually held a contest to see who could come up with the best use for sargassum. And the winning submission was the idea of taking it, bagging it up in burlap sacks, rinsing it off, and putting it in your garden for fertilizer. So there's some precedent for it being taken off the beach and utilized in those ways. I certainly haven't studied the use of sargassum in mangrove habitat. It stands to reason that anywhere that detritus would be arriving and causing soil stabilization and nutrient enhancement, that sargassum might be able to be substituted. But as Tom brought up, it's you're going and you're kind of breaking that natural system. So anytime you're doing that, there needs to be a good amount of study done to make sure that you're not introducing a chemical or a process that the sargassum has that would be detrimental to that environment.
Definitely.
In my experience, where there are no dunes on a beach, it's not often due to natural processes. Oftentimes, where there are no dunes on a beach, it's due to anthropogenic impacts. Either they were removed for tourism, they were removed for development, they were spread out to make the beach wider in times that we weren't as understanding of the full ecosystem. Very rarely do you have a time that there is a healthy beach system, that there are not dunes forming. You do have instances, especially along barrier islands, where the barrier island becomes breached and an area that may have been a beach and a dune system becomes more of a sand flat. But then we're talking about something different. We're not talking about a beach at that point. We're talking about a completely different environment. So in my experience, in a naturally occurring healthy beach system, you're always going to have a dune system of some sort, because you're always going to have vegetation encroaching on that area. The vegetation traps sand. That sand becomes a coppice mound. That coppice mound becomes a dune. That forms a dune field. I mean, it's usually when you see a beach with a lack of a dune, it's not because Mother Nature put it that way. It's because humans said it looks better this way, or I want to be able to see the ocean from my first floor balcony, or what have you. So yeah, and in my opinion, the natural system is not being disrupted by utilizing sargassum in that manner, but you do risk it if you start to talk about applications outside of the beach ecosystem. Tom, did you want to add in something?
Yeah, that system that we had about a thing going along the beach, picking up the sargassum, bringing it on to a baler. The question was asked, you're going to be removing sand from the beach. And so, Robert, this is his idea, we put a spray system along the top of the conveyor belt that's bringing it up, and you wash the sand out. I mean, it's on a thing with holes in it, the rollers that bring it up. So you wash the sand out, but also you wash the salt off of it. You make it a better product if you want to do something other than build dunes, like use it for compost. So in that rig that we had with the baler and harvester and whatever, he had figured in a way to get the sand out, alleviate that complaint, and it would also, as a byproduct, get the salt out of it.
That's amazing. That's really cool. And yes, like you don't want to take away the sand from the bottom of the beach to then put dunes in on the top. Yeah. I think that wouldn't make much sense. So projects like this always need local partners. Like you as a university probably didn't have like a beach that you controlled yourself. So who were you working on locally to make this project happen?
The City of Galveston and the Galveston Park Board were crucial in facilitating this project. We have a good friend who runs the Galveston Parks Board, Kelly Deshawn, Mario Rabago, and one of their employees, Jesse Ojeda. Those three people became some of our biggest champions. And if it weren't for the Parks Board allowing us to conduct this research on their beach, there would have been no research. So they were spectacular champions for our cause. Along that same line, there was an advisory board called the Beach Maintenance Advisory Board, and some good friends of ours, Jerry Moan and Clyde Stedham, were absolutely paramount in making this possible. Again, when you start to pitch some of the crazy ideas that Tom and Robert were prone to pitching, you have to have people who are going to stand behind you and go, I know they sound crazy, but I think it'll work. And and all of those folks did. I mean, they really vouched for us and gave us that opportunity to do the research that we did, and that ultimately is what allowed for us to have the clout that when we said, hey, we think you could make alcohol out of it, they didn't just laugh us out of town. They kind of let us, it was something that people were willing to give us a shot at because we had been able to prove ourselves in other instances.
Yeah, big ideas require big minds.
Yeah.
Parks Board also contributed funds to the effort, and which was very crucial. We could take that money, and I could match that against other things and grow a little bit that they gave
really
us into a larger amount.
It really was. Tom, he excels at finding opportunities
to the program.
to make things happen.
Which is key.
To say that we operated the Sargassum Early Advisory System on a shoestring budget is to exaggerate the size of our budget. We were oftentimes operating with just we were scraping together anything we could find, and Tom has a charismatic approach to interacting with folks, and his ability to take a very small amount of funding and to generate greater opportunity from that. I mean, that he was a crucial part of making the lab itself work and making any of the research that we put out during that time happen, because had he not found the funding, you can't do much without money.
That's unfortunately true.
It was crucial.
Yes, that's how it is. For your next projects, what are you for Sargassum? Would it be suited
whatever
for
it takes
for carbon sequestration, like sinking the bales to the seafloor?
I know that Rich is your patron. I know that he's interested in that concept, and what I would say is that sargassum has as much of a chance to be a solution for the ecological issues that we're facing as any other vegetative material. When he originally brought up to me the idea of using sargassum as some sort of carbon sink, there's a lot that makes sense in that process, especially, again, you go back to trying to mimic what nature does naturally. When sargassum is floating out in the Sargasso Sea, it is not growing, it is floating pretty stable. But when it's impacted by a large storm, if it's pushed down to a depth upon which the pressure is greater than the air sacs or the vesicles can manage, those burst, and that actually causes the sargassum to sink. And you also see sargassum sinking from things like bioaccumulation of the little critters that try and cling to it. If you get too many, that sargassum mat will sink. And so again, you go back to trying to mimic what nature's doing. What's being proposed in terms of using it for carbon sequestration is something that mimics a natural process. That being said, it is to my knowledge, it's an unexplored field, and there's certainly a lot of consideration and slow and methodical study that would need to go into any sort of application like that. But as scientists, Tom and I are never one to try and discourage an idea just because it sounds crazy, because we've had plenty ourselves, and you have to have those crazy sounding ideas in order to solve some of the bigger problems that our world is facing. And so there's certainly a possibility that sargassum could be suited for carbon sequestration. I think the time will tell.
Yes.
Is it known that sargassum is a carbon sequestrator? Yes or no? It is.
Yes.
Okay. So it is. So
Rather
it will
in the
do
middle of the
that.
Atlantic, maybe.
Then You're going to take it out and put it in the Sigsbee Deep in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, in bales, maybe, in a very deep place. Remember the example that Brandon gave you of the people at the end of the Depression where they were hauling this stuff out off of Galveston and dumping it? And if they had to go real fast to get back to shore before the sargassum beat them back to shore. When you put stuff in the ocean, you never know where it's going to turn up. So it'll sequester carbon. It sequesters carbon. But what you do with it in the ocean is the question that needs to be answered. Is it going to turn up somewhere that you don't want it to turn up? There are three things you should be very careful about doing. Is being on TV and saying anything, writing anything, or making a statement in front of a witness. Because these things oftentimes come back to haunt you. They come back to visit you at a time when you least want them to visit you.
Needs to be assessed before dumping anything.
Yeah, but you know it will do the job. It will do the job of carbon sequestration, right? So that's a given. But what happens to it after you move it around? That's where you could get caught with your foot in a trap.
So for our last question, we want to ask you, what can you share about sargassum or about doing science or about having crazy ideas to the youth of your local place or for all the youth listening to us?
As I mentioned, when I first came to Texas, I'd never heard of sargassum. I hadn't even grown up on the coast, so I was truly a fresh set of eyes on the issue. And to me, sargassum is the perfect example of why it's so important to understand that the ecosystem that we exist in, the world that we see on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, is just a part of a very large, very complex, very delicate system. The historic perspective that we discussed today in terms of how sargassum was viewed in the past, how it was tried to be dealt with in the past, that hasn't changed. We continue to try and understand the systems around us. We continue to try and deal with them in ways that maybe aren't the wisest. Sargassum is often seen as a blight or some sort of problem, but the fact of the matter is, if humans weren't occupying the coast, there wouldn't be a problem. It's just part of the system. It's as I mentioned, it's as natural as the waves on the beach. It just is less frequent.
No problem.
And understanding to the youth, understanding that you are a single player in a very large game, and that the world that as you understand it is a very small part of a very large and complex and fascinating system. That to me is the moral of the sargassum story. You know, you have individual communities and they see sargassum as this arriving blight that squashes their chances of high tourism rates and impacts the smell of their environment, and that is what they see. But what they don't see is that sargassum is a floating ecosystem that provides shelter and stability and food for a number of creatures on many ecological levels. And as it does that, as it's floating through this loop system out in the Atlantic and through the Caribbean and up into the Gulf and even over into Europe and Africa, as it's out there doing its thing, it is playing a vital role in so many more lives than just ours as human. Turtles depend on it. Young turtles depend on it for flotation when they first hatch. Older turtles depend on it for food, to go and eat food from out under it. There are species of fish that lay their eggs in it. There are species of fish that live their entire lives in it. There are species of fish that hunt underneath it. There are shorebirds and others that come and they hunt the life that take shelter within it. Once it reaches the shore, that's just part of its complex life cycle. And we do ourselves a disservice by not seeking out the rest of the understanding. And that applies to everything, not just sargassum. We do ourselves a disservice if we don't give ourselves the opportunity to see the whole picture. And science is a very great lens through which to view that larger picture. And that would be my message to the youth is pursue what interests you, pursue what confuses you, try and understand as much as you can, because the more that you do, the more questions you'll have and the more exciting your life will be. A very nice woman.
Tell them what you guys did with the bucket brigade,
who turned out to be my wife, and I partook in a outreach effort on Galveston Island while we were in college. And we were one of many, dozens at least, individuals who walked up and down the beaches several weekends. And we would actually do small little workshops with the people who were out there enjoying their day on the beach. And the entire idea of it was sargassum was on the beach, people were on the beach. Rather than just letting them come to their own conclusion, let's get people out there who have studied this and let's talk to them about what it actually is. And so the Bucket Brigade was, again, another Parks Board effort headed up by Kelly Deshawn that gave us the opportunity to educate the public who were out there on the beach. And we would take the sargassum, we would shake it out into a bucket, and we would identify all the little creatures, everything that was in there. If there were branching bryozoa growing on the sargassum, we would show them that. We would identify what species of sargassum we were looking at, whether it was fluitins or natans. We would break out for them the different parts of the sargassum. And the whole idea was, let's not just have this be something that has ruined the vacation or has impacted our time on the beach. It's part of the beach. And the more you understand it, the more you will accept the fact that beaches don't usually look like postcards. You're not going to have that classic concept of a vacant beach chair with an umbrella and a small drink with a little umbrella inside of it, waiting on a white, soft sand beach with clear blue water. Oftentimes that's not what the coast looks like. And the more that we can help people understand that, the better we can manage the coastal resources, because we're not trying to make them fit into a mold that they aren't naturally going to fit into.
That's actually a great initiative, and I think things like this should be done all around the Caribbean.
If you tried to build a business on harvesting sargassum based on the landings on Galveston in 2018, and you put a lot of money into it, and then no sargassum showed up on the beach in the rest of the time, when you didn't have enough sargassum to make beer, you'd go broke. So you cannot rely on this stuff being at a fixed point, in my opinion. If you have a shore facility of bricks and mortar and whatever, you may be in bankruptcy in a couple of years. So it is a movable problem.
Yeah. Great idea.
You need to be mobile, so you could go to the middle of the Atlantic or down in the Caribbean with your boats and your equipment. My thought.
That's a really good advice to everybody who wants to start something with sargassum, for sure. It was a huge pleasure having both of you on the podcast, and we heard so many cool stories.
Thank you.
So thank you again for being here and talking to us today.
Sure.
So, Mar, how did we leave the conversation with? What did you take away?
I actually took a lot of things. Like, they told us a lot of nice, interesting stories, and they kind of put sargassum in the US and Texas, especially in a historical context, which was very interesting to me to see how sargassum actually played a role in historical events like wars or whatever. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yes, I thought so too. I learned a lot about how sargassum has been there for a long time and has gone through all those events. Funnily enough, it seemed like they wanted to make some history, and they definitely have with their monitoring program, but when they wanted to make a beer festival with Sargassum and really, become part of history as well, the Sargassum stopped coming. And that's really sad that once they finally find solutions for it, for the beach dunes and for making beer, that then the Sargassum isn't there anymore, and we don't know why. And
I think that speaks for moving a step forward with Sargassum and maybe even cultivating Sargassum to be able to have at least a small proportion of Sargassum available all year round.
Yes, or at least in the years that you don't have much, that you can do something with it. What did you think about crazy ideas and getting the social license to do crazy ideas? Do you think that's important for scientists?
Yeah, I think it was very interesting to see how they are both very much this crazy minds that would go for what at that moment might sound like a crazy project, but that in the end turns out to be really useful. And I like how they actually developed, for example, the monitoring system. And with that, they proved that they can actually do real world applicable stuff. And then they had the social license to do other more crazy things. And so I think having that balance of, okay, we're actually doing these things that look so serious and useful for society on the one hand, and then that gives you kind of the authority to also do crazy things, which I think are always necessary to move things forward.
Yes, and their ideas also seem to be not always super serious. Like, making a beer is just something fun to do. And we sometimes need ideas like that too, also in science. Like, let's just have some fun with things and find solutions that help, but are also something that people really enjoy.
Yes, definitely.
So this was a really long episode, so we won't be talking on for forever. And we wish you all a really, really nice week. And we have a new episode coming out next week for you to listen to.
Yes, more new adventures related to Sargassum in any part of the planet.
See you then.
Thank you for tuning in today and learning with us from our guests. If you want more information about our guests talk about today, then please check our show notes for links and information in our archives, and don't forget to like and share our podcast with your friends.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please consider supporting us financially by becoming a Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can support us and get the exclusive benefit of being able to submit questions for our interviewees ahead of time.
The Sargassum podcast is produced by Marine Conservation Without Borders and is made possible with financial support from the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center's U.S. Department of Education Title VI grant.
It is produced by Marcel Van de Kamp and our summer interns, Lauren Blankenship, Eloise Lopez, and Jenna Contucio, and hosted by Robbie Thigpen, Francisca Elmer, Mar Fernandez, Florence Menez, Cleo Meridakis, and Paula Diaz.
We will be back next week with another exciting guest. The music of this podcast is from the song Them a Pray by Drizzle Road Rana, an artist from Roatan. Follow him on Spotify or YouTube for more music. But for now, here is the full song, Them a Pray.
Hey, brother, hear me now. Brother, dog. Now me understand. Now for them no want to see we get nothing. That's why them a pray and always front and star. Now for them no want to see we get nothing. That's why them a pray. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Them a pray. Me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Me no great success. Now for them a pray. Them a pray. Them a pray. Me no gain progress. Now for them a pray. Them a pray me to great success. So me tell them, yeah, I'm a system man, me no take that. Only if it come from Jah, I'll accept that. Not for them, me put my trust in and give me setback. Yo, select that, me don't pull up that. Tell some wicked that bad mind, me no fear them. Anytime them cheat and chat, me no hear them. Me dash a few hearts so for the queer so tell them where them. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no gain progress. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no reap success. So me tell them yeah. Yes, me know me have a lot of fake friends, but me never woulda thought me woulda have fake family. So me tell them straight, me no trust them. Me no trust you and me no trust him. Fake friend lost bad mind in a real life. Star me no rate that, star me no rate that. When me real for me woulda bust a million shot in a real life. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no gain progress. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no reap success. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no gain progress. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no reap success. So me tell them yeah. Tell them they go look alike, but them a hate and grudge and creep on mine. Them a move like Judas. Them a move like Judas. Plus, everybody have a life to live. So when I give one rascal who a try judge me, like them chit chat to what them want to say. Cause none of them out there nah feed. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no gain progress. Now for them a free. Them a free, me no reap success. Now for them a free.